Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential.
Before we dive in, I encourage you to subscribe on Buzzsprout or join our Patreon community for exclusive content. Your ratings and reviews help us grow, so please take a moment to share the podcast with friends and family. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds. Let's get started.
Storytelling is the glue, is the foundational energy that creates and holds culture and peoples together. Storytelling is fundamental to the human condition from the moment we're born. In the end of all things, legacy, life, work, the only thing that matters is love.
Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast, where life is story. I'm your host, author Dominic Domingo.
And I am the co-host and producer, Virginia Grenier.
Thank you for being here, everybody. You know, we're changing up our format just a tiny bit. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we're keeping a lot of things the same, but we're kind of just cutting to the chase these days. So by way of introduction, I will say I am jazzed about this week's guest. She's a dear friend, and I'm just really looking forward to actually listening and learning. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to read her bio and then bring her on in. Andrea M. Slominski, PhD, is a women's therapeutic midlife and menopause coach, speaker, and author. She went back to school at 55 and earned her MA and PhD in women's psychology and mythology, focusing on the triple transformation women must navigate in midlife. Her coaching method is based on archetypal and depth psychology. In her PhD research, Andrea identified the new life stage that has emerged for women over the past 120 years, which includes perimenopause, midlife, menopause, and postmenopause. She names this new life stage from ages 45 to 70 and beyond Regency, and identifies it as women's new power years. Welcome, Andrea Slominski.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Virginia. It's nice to be here.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you for being here in cyberspace.
It's my pleasure to have a soulful conversation with you two. I'm really excited to be here.
Likewise, I can't wait. I've actually been, as you know, stalking you online, and I don't know everything about you. I feel like you're a sister to me, and I've been tracking you, but of course, there's a lot of prep. So one thing that came back to me, by the way, is do you remember I don't expect you to at all, but the very first day we met, I think was at one of Renee's singing workshops. And personally, I remember chatting in the parking lot for 2 hours. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, that does ring a bell. It seems when like minds connect in creative situations, sometimes there's that like two magnets, they grab onto each other and there's some kind of instant connection.
Yeah, I just remember we went there, and without indicting anyone, I think we talked about everything up to and including hallucinogenics.
I'm sure we did.
In a parking lot, yeah, in Santa Clarita.
Absolutely.
I just remember we really instantly made a connection. So yeah, there's a lot of history there, and I've been kind of tracking what you're up to. But first of all, did I get that everything in the bio right, or is there anything you would want to correct?
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Absolutely.
Okay, well, as you know, that is just the beginning. There's so much more to you. So I'd love to back up a little bit, and I'm going to prompt you to tell us just a little bit more about what you've been up to on the planet. But before we do that, I just do want to say I feel very lucky to have you. And one of the fringe benefits, I think, Virginia, you would agree, one of the fringe benefits is whenever we have guests on, whether they're, new acquaintances or lifelong friends, and in my case, I feel like I've been being reminded what formidable people I've had in my life. And like Greg Spolenka, I haven't really had a tete-a-tete, a head-to-head with him since the 90s, but it really renews my faith in humanity. Watching the news can really get you down these days. But I just am finding myself reminded that there are really cool people out there, and you're included in that.
Well,
So,
thank
of
you.
course, yeah,
Thank you.
feel very lucky. And
Well, I don't know. I've always been a huge fan of yours, Nick, since we started to get to know one another years ago and did some side projects together and stuff. I've always said to you and to your sister, who's my best friend, and to everyone that I know, that I consider to you to be truly a Renaissance man.
yeah, I
You're
knew you were
one of
gonna
the,
say that.
yeah, you're one of the
That's
most
funny.
talented, creative, imaginative, original men living on
Okay,
the.
you're very sweet, and I was not prompting you to say that, but I feel the same way, and we are kindred spirits. So hopefully, some of that will be evident in our conversations. But yeah,
Exactly.
kindred spirits for sure. But you inspire me, and really, I'm not kidding when I say I look forward to learning and listening. No pressure, but especially when it comes to mythology, I think I've told you I'm just kind of like, especially with The Seeker, I did enough research to feel like I could tell a really good story about the human condition that's, what do they call it? Character driven and, has an emotional
Mhm.
core to it. But I learned on an as needed basis. So I do need to play catch up. So I'm relying on you when it comes to, these, especially the archetypes that we talked about in our pre interview. Maybe the
Yeah,
article that I'm going to prompt you to read. Okay. Anyway, without further ado, I want to straight out the gate, if you don't mind, as part of our new format. In the spirit of the podcast, we're going to start asking every guest straight out the gate, if you don't mind, if you could humor me.
sure.
What do you feel has been the role of storytelling in culture? And then the part B is, has it evolved over time, or has it always played the same role in culture?
Ooh, that's a good one. I like
Do,
that.
do, do,
Um,
do, 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 do.
storytelling, storytelling is the glue,
Mm,
is the foundational energy that creates and holds culture and peoples together. I mean, storytelling is fundamental to the human condition from the moment we're born.
mm,
You know,
mhm,
our first story, our first episode, our first lines of our
mhm,
personal myth are written in our relationship with our mother, whether she's the good mother, the bad mother,
mm,
the
mhm,
terrible mother, the helicopter mother, the too good mother, the neglectful mother.
mm,
Yeah, that relationship is the
mhm,
first chapter in our story, and then from that relationship comes the eventual, quickly in terms of how long a human lives, but our eventual understanding that we are separate from the mother, that we
mhm,
are not one, that we realize that we are two. And that's sort
mhm.
of that next step
Is
of
that
the.
like the individuation process that happens?
I think it's step one of many, 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 many steps, and hopefully we complete it at some point in our life.
Mhm,
But um going to the macro, which you said cultural, uh,
mhm,
really, I think about um, storytelling in terms of early human culture, and what we know about Neolithic and pre-Neolithic cultures, and
mm,
the function that storytelling and myth and ritual served to do everything from get organized for the hunt to to explaining the natural world and the causes of the things that happen in the natural world, how to
mhm,
survive in the natural world.
mhm,
As Joseph Campbell said, myth, which is story that explains who we are and where we are and why.
mhm,
It has four functions, and one of them is that these stories give us a foundational agreement of how we are to live together. Our
mhm, mhm.
laws, our agreements, our morals, our.
I like the word codes. It's the codes
Yeah,
we live by, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So story is story is fundamental
Mm,
to the human psyche and the human experience, and so it has to be
mhm.
creative force that holds culture together. I mean, when I look at
Beautiful.
the different mythologies that I've studied from around the world and how different they are, but
Mm,
yet
mm.
how similar they are.
All right. Well, that's Joseph Campbell in a nutshell, right? The masks of
Mhm.
God. It just takes different forms, figurative forms. Yeah. Well, we're
Absolutely.
so wired for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so what was the second half of the question?
Well, just has it evolved? Has the role of story and culture? Well, see, we always talk about micro and macro as well, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a catharsis for the individual when engaging in storytelling. And then, of course, there's a tribal outcome. But I'm just wondering on the maybe macro scale in terms of how it functions in culture, has that evolved over time or is it still serving the same purpose?
That's
Storytelling.
very interesting, because I think it's become fragmented.
Mm,
And I think that, and this is one of the more interesting things of Campbell's later work to me,
mhm,
is the idea that myth and the stories that we live by, and even Jung's work talking about the myths that we live by and that we're born under and that we're part of, right?
mhm,
As a unifying force in culture. Um, Now the world has gotten so small, and there are so many different myths that are um, presenting different uh, cultural images,
mhm.
that
So,
it's
sorry, go
becoming
ahead.
fragmented. So what
Mhm,
we
mhm.
need is somehow at some point in 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, if we're still here,
Yeah,
a new myth,
exactly.
yeah, a new myth needs to develop,
Mm,
one that
mhm.
includes the whole planet, all life, and everyone on it. A
Right, and
unifying story.
yeah, and I think actually you quoted somebody on that front, right? Who was it
Yeah,
that was that,
Campbell. Yeah,
Campbell, okay.
Campbell. Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
was that in the, Masks of God series, the PBS, not PBS, the what is it, British Broadcasting Network?
Um, it. I'm trying to think of where. I think it's in. I
BBC
think
is
it
what
was
I
in
was
the.
trying to say.
Yeah, I think it was in the PBS with the PBS special,
Right, right,
"The Power of Myth."
right,
And then there was a book that was put together from the transcript.
right. Yeah, I
I'm
read it,
pretty.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's in there, and a lot of mythologists and a lot of academics and a lot of feminists and a lot of people have a lot of problems with aspects of Joseph Campbell's work,
Mhm.
which
Yeah,
I
we've experienced it on the show, haven't we, Virginia?
yeah,
Yes, we
which
I
have.
I
get
would
I get in trouble when I talk about the hero's journey.
yeah, which I understand, and
Yeah,
there are issues, with moving forward as culture is changing, but I really do think that somehow we're going to have to find a way to move forward together, or we're not going to move forward at all.
yeah. Well, what I hear in that is that there is a fragmentation, but whenever you kind of see both sides of an issue when it rears its head, right? When things come to a head, and in the spirit of story, conflict always signals change, right? So when
Right.
you see polar opposites kind of surfacing, that's a good thing because you get to diagnose, right? But on this podcast, the way it kind of manifests is like we've heard, and Virginia, you can back me or not, but I think a lot of people are very aware that we are synthesizing binaries for sure. That seems to be the path we're on. And that includes masculine and feminine and, just all things non binary. But when it comes to all the stories that make up the tapestry that is the human condition, we finally are, right, spotlighting indigenous peoples who haven't yet told their story and to their colonizers. How about that? And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, own voices is a movement for a reason because we're starting to acknowledge that, sure, there is a template. And again, I will defend the hero's journey till my dying breath because I think the guest that found it oppressive and just another form of patriarchy to blah, blah, blah. I said, well, then I didn't say it, but I thought you don't understand it then because it's about all of us,
Mhm.
right? The hero's journey is not a patriarchal tool to oppress anybody or silence their voice. So anyway, don't you see though that you kind of hinted that maybe different, I would say Western archetypes don't always translate. And then other way around. I teach at Art Center, and 12 of my 20 students are Lees, Woos, Yuns, or Parks. So I
Hmm.
started noticing, in what I teach, which is visual development, like in kabuki theater, for example, you can have a line, that vase is my aunt. And it's like, what?
Yeah,
Like it means absolutely nothing to us.
yeah.
I was amazed by the common ground. And part of it is the world is a smaller place, right? And tropes and archetypes and stereotypes are transcending cultures now. But I was shocked at the common ground, to be honest, even between East and West. Anyway, I'm just agreeing with you that maybe we are merging all those things by finally letting silenced voices tell their stories.
Well, and I absolutely, and what I think is really interesting about that, and I think is really current and
Hmm.
important about that,
Hmm.
is that many indigenous traditions hold the divine to be
Mm,
immanent,
mm,
to be within the
mhm.
world, within nature, within life as it exists on the planet, that the divine is here now, we are a part of it, it is within
It's
us.
intrinsic where we like to separate it. It's out there, right?
Well, that it's what we would say is that it's immanent instead of transcendent,
Mm, mhm,
where the God is where the transcendent model, which is sort of the Judeo-Christian model, is that where the earth is fallen, it's sinful, God is above, beyond, that we must transcend the world, we must um somehow fly out of this fallen world to the worlds of the heavens, to the worlds of the gods. And a lot of the indigenous traditions are saying, no, the goddess and the
mm,
god
mhm,
and the sacred is immanent within all life. And it is
Mm.
here now, in you, in me, in the rocks, in the trees, in the sun, in the system, in the seasons, in the turning of the wheel. And so
mhm,
they're
mhm.
very different ways
Yep.
of looking at the divine.
Yes. Well, do you
And
feel in Judeo, you have to preface everything, right?
yeah,
Western European Judeo-Christian culture, I think the mainstream's getting a little more comfortable with that, right? The New Age movement, it was like, no, 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 you gotta, again, the fire and brimstone, and it's not within, and it was really uncomfortable, especially in fundamentalist Christian circles. I think maybe the Judeo-Christian mainstream is a little more comfortable with the idea that we have divinity within us. Is that true?
I,
I
you know, that would be something that would be an interesting research project. I think there are branches of the Judeo-Christian tradition, certainly, that see the divine as part of the whole life system,
Mhm.
but still the the concept that no one gets to the Father except through me,
Right.
that
Right.
you have to rise up and be resurrected through Christ in order to reach the divine.
You
These
need
are
the
all,
golden ticket. Yeah.
yeah, these are all transcendent images of God who is beyond the mortal world.
Right, right.
yeah.
And
Also,
and
I wanted to say something that's good, and I agree with you saying, Andrea, on that. And I hear what Dominic's saying too. So being in Utah, which is definitely
Mm.
a Mormon dominated state, so definitely Judeo Christian base. What's been interesting that I've seen over the last few months in articles. So the fact you said, seeing research more into that area would be interesting, because I know in the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, which is the Mormons, um,
My
the
people,
yeah, the philosophy
really.
is still very much what Andrea is saying, but at the same time, I've been seeing in our local newspapers more
Mm.
articles about um, more spiritualism, what used to be more of the New Age or the occult kind of perceptions from the 80s, 90s, and 70s, about connecting with nature, and and how it is divinely in us. It's not something you have to transcend. So I think that at least what I'm seeing here in a state like this, that's very church driven,
Mhm.
that yes, the church still is teaching that, but the younger generations in the church
They're
are
not
kind of,
buying it.
yeah, they're branching out. Like, even though they
Right.
still go to church on Sunday, they're also branching out in their spirituality and realizing there's more to it than just that rote
Mhm.
practice on Sunday.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think the squeaky wheel, I think you're right. I think the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So the
Mhm.
the the fundamentalists on all sides that scream the loudest get the
Mhm.
most media attention. And
Yes,
and they're
yes.
probably 20%,
Yeah.
right,
Yep, yep.
of the
Mhm.
Kinda like the
population.
whole Republican Party. Anyway, um, yeah, so many parallels. But actually, I do wanna backpedal. I'm so sorry if you have
Yeah.
more to say. You can
No,
jump in
no, no.
anytime. But I do wanna start at the beginning a little bit because I was so intrigued by again, I hate to air our dirty laundry, but we do have a pre-interview, and we have a form that our guests filled out, and you went above and beyond, by the way. I love what you wrote. Andrea. So I was intrigued by a line that I'm going to read, and maybe it's you can dovetail off of this.
Sure.
Again, this is a way of kind of just telling us what you've been up to on the planet and how it led to your current practice, which seems to be the culmination, right, of a lot of things, as is the way of life.
Mhm.
But the line that I would love to prompt you with, and hopefully you can dovetail off of it, is the journey that brought me to where I am now in my career is one that was linked to story from the beginning.
Yeah.
Does that conjure anything for you
Oh,
as a way of
it
letting us
conjures,
know?
yes,
Yeah.
it conjures James Hillman and the acorn theory and all those things, but we don't have time to get into that. But
No, I'm picturing little Andrea with all those books at the
yes, yes,
base
I
of the
mean,
bookshelf.
absolutely. When I was a child, what I was talking about in the pre-interview was that, in our summer vacations, we'd go visit our grandparents
Mhm.
at this little summer house in New Hampshire. And my grandfather, my Swiss grandfather, weighs to nothing, 6'4", huge, um, mountain man, um, would take all of the magazines of the National Geographic and in every year, and he would bind them into books.
Wow.
So
Very
they were
cool.
all, his shelves were filled with all of this archaeological, anthropological, mythological um, material. And I would just sit on the floor at the bottom of the bookcase and just pull out, you know, the the sections that had like three or four, you know, magazines in it and just pour over them. I was fascinated with it. I was fascinated with other cultures. I was fascinated with everything from the photographs to the stories. I mean, what I could understand, at the age of 8 or 10 when I'm reading
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm.
Um, and it just always interested me. Um, I was in school. I went to a prep school, so we had lots of heavy reading material in the summer. Read a lot of literature. I didn't read a lot of popular novels or those kinds of things. None of the Captain Underpants or that kind of thing. Um, not that
Goosebumps.
that's
I
not
guess
that
that was
that's
later.
yeah, not that that's bad, but that wasn't what I was allowed to read.
Right.
And so, story was story was adventure, reading,
Mm, mm,
sitting in a corner in my house in a sunny corner, or sitting out on the patio by the lake at my grandparents' house and reading was a ticket to other worlds,
mm,
to
Mhm.
other places. And so I think I was hooked at a very young age. And then, of course, my early career and college studies took me into theater, which is s- storytelling, certainly.
mm,
And then, as I went further on in my education many years later, theater is there's a huge academic, brouhaha. Was theater first or was
mm,
ritual first, or was
mm,
myth, actually, was myth first or was ritual first? Many say it was ritual, which was then became myth, which then became theater.
mhm.
So it's
Yeah, you wrote theater is the twin of ritual, which is the daughter or sister of myth. I
yeah,
loved that.
yeah. And so then everything became about storytelling, taking the playwright's work and then
Mhm,
working collaboratively as a director with many, many people to bring the story to life. And
mhm,
then the thing that I love about theater is that every single performance is an individual experience. It's never repeated twice. It's not like you can put the film on and it's the same every time. Every performance is different. Every audience is different. Every energetic exchange is different. And
Mhm.
then the audience comes in and agrees to suspend their disbelief, and you take
Mm,
a journey together through
beautiful.
whatever the story is that you're following. And then
Mhm.
there's either laughter, which is a catharsis of its own, or
Yep.
it's drama, and there's the cathartic climax of the journey that everyone in the room takes together.
Beautiful. Yep. That's tribal bonding right there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
which in a
Absolutely.
sense is ritual,
Yep.
right? You know.
Well, there's so much to it. I mean, Aristotle comes up on this podcast a lot, and I would argue that, with fascism on the horizon, that's kind of when he coined that term catharsis, and he was absolutely fighting for the the cultural value of that catharsis and what it serves. And I would say that's not unlike the climate at this moment. But you know,
Absolutely. History
yeah,
repeats itself, doesn't it?
absolutely.
Quite
Well, there,
frequently.
yeah, yeah, well, that's why story's so important, right? God forbid we forget the horrors of the past, right? But,
Yeah, well, it's funny because when you think about the time of Aristotle and theater at that point in ancient Greece, classical Greece, whichever period you want to look at,
mhm,
you know, that was where everyone came together and plays were written about what was going on, either politically or culturally
mhm,
at the
mm.
time. And yeah, of course, it was a patriarchal culture. It's most likely women weren't allowed to go. Some people say women were, some people say they weren't. We're not going to get into that debate. But
Right.
everyone went to see these plays. Everyone that was
Mhm,
able-bodied, that was allowed, would go to these plays, which would deal with the issues of the time and make everyone think together at the same time about what
mm,
was happening.
mhm.
But now that doesn't happen because everybody's fragmented on the internet.
Right,
Everybody's
right.
fragmented on their apps. Theater has become an elitist art form
Mm,
that nobody can afford to go to,
mhm.
and most young people aren't interested in going to and don't really understand what it is. And so it's storytelling has shifted, and this is what
Yeah.
I said
Oh,
before.
that goes back to the earlier question.
Yeah.
Maybe it is in terms of format and genre, it is changing, right? With streaming, for example, and instead of having that communal experience in a theater, where all that dopamine and all those bonding chemicals and even the syncing of brainwaves, which
Mhm.
happens at a music event,
Yep.
because brick and mortar is going by the wayside, and everyone's filing their nails and doing their laundry while watching a movie streaming.
Mhm.
Maybe we are missing out on something. I would argue it's still available. You just got to seek it out.
Yeah, that's true. But if it's not something that you're raised knowing, appreciating,
Mm,
or being aware of, although I guess, if you look at Shakespeare in the Park in New York City when Joe Papp
mm.
was doing it, and tens of thousands of people would show up to see it. So I guess that's one good thing, you
And
know.
it's so
And,
refreshing though, we have Shakespeare in the Park here in Griffith Park, and
mhm,
it rocks my world. But
yeah.
the example, tell me if this resonates. The example I use is it's a dated reference now, but I think I saw like the third Matrix in the theater, and it's effects driven, and it's got a franchise attached, and
Mhm.
it just exploding helicopters everywhere you go. And I would say, I mean, I like the Matrix, but it is a little bit about feeding the addiction to adrenaline and
Yeah.
cortisol, more so than transforming us, right?
Right.
I don't know. The first one was pretty transformational, but anyway, you get the idea. The
Yeah.
next day, I went to the Bodhi Tree bookstore. If you remember that,
Yes, of
it
course.
was I think it was Vietnamese shadow puppets at the Bodhi Tree bookstore. So minimal,
Hmm.
but it obviously transported me way more than the Matrix, and that said it all to me. Sometimes we're refreshed by, if that makes sense, suspending a moment or forcing one to be in the moment instead of like at a Taylor Swift concert, just making
I
sure you
was just
capture it
going
on
to
your
say
cell
that.
phone.
Yeah, you took that right out of my mouth. I was going to say, look at the Taylor Swift phenomenon.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
It's funny you guys just brought that up because I literally just had to read a research study on her influence on her fan base. I just this past week, and was in a discussion about it, and I kind of brought up like because I always thought her music, because what they were focusing on that, by the way, was her influence, but how she talks about like her eating disorders and body image. And I'm
Hmm.
like, I thought most of her songs were about breakups, at least all the ones I've ever really like heard or kind of semi remember listening to, like pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so when did that shift happen? It was a very interesting research story about it, or article on it. But yeah, it's amazing, like the phenomenon that we see now. Uh, and it goes back to, how you guys were talking about Shakespeare in the Park. Like we have the Shakespearean Festival up in Cedar City, Utah, that you can go to. But I think it's sad that you don't see as many community theaters anymore. That it
Mm,
has become more of an elitist. Like we have
mm,
Tuacahn here that people go to see Broadway shows, and I think the cheapest ticket. I mean, not that it's super expensive, but it is with inflation, especially now. It's like, I think 60 something dollars for a ticket.
wow.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
50, 70-year-old white women are the women who keep Broadway alive.
yeah, and
Mm,
it's sad. And I actually try and, like I didn't go see Disney Frozen. I was like, okay, my kids like watched that cartoon a bazillion times when it first came out because they were little. So, as now going into college age kids, they really probably don't want to go see Frozen, but they had Anastasia. And so I
mm,
took them to go see that, because to me that, and it was really fun watching them. And then, they know me growing up, of course, being a Gen Xer in the Cold War era, they kind of looked at me like, oh, I kind of get some of the stuff that you reference now or talk about after seeing Anastasia on the
mm.
stage, because obviously, it's set in, old Russia. So
See, I sorry, I have a feeling they're starved for it. That's
Mhm.
why they're starved for community. That's
Yeah,
maybe why the Taylor Swift concerts are so popular.
Well,
maybe.
absolutely. I mean,
Sorry.
these young girls, I mean, they're they go to school and the rest of their community is online. And it's so interesting to
Mhm.
me that these young girls will spend all of their free time, evenings and weekends, making friendship bracelets, making all these things that they take with them to the concert to give to other girls.
Mm,
Wow.
yeah.
It's all about trading, it's all about friendship, it's all about support.
Well,
And
it's a community, right? It's that
yeah,
Mhm.
feeling of interconnectivity wherever you can find it. Yeah.
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
All
I
right.
I don't know. Do
Taylor
you guys?
Swift. I can't have an intelligence I know nothing. I really
Oh yeah,
can't contribute.
I'm not a Swifty, but it was an interest. I'll also do too, Dom, if you want to read it. It's an interesting research research study, but I think that a lot of, going back to the whole connection too, I think that's the thing. And it's the whole coming together and having those collaborative discussions and curiosity. I think that people are starving for that
Mm,
curiosity to explore an idea. And you don't have that when you're on social media.
right.
It's not the
Yeah,
same.
the novelty,
Hmm.
you get the little dendrites going when you introduce, right, new novel
Hmm.
experiences, and you don't get that on a tiny little phone, in my opinion.
Mm-mm.
Andrea, where have we gone?
We've gone out into the world of the Swifties.
We did.
And there's no going back.
I was gonna say there's no return.
Right. I am going to steer it back though, because when you were, I really loved the imagery of you sitting at the bottom of that bookshelf, and you mentioned some abandoned, right, old foundations of old dwellings, and I was right there with you.
Yeah,
How the hell did your love of story, all the way through your theater experience, how did that bring you where you are today? I want to get up to the point of your current practice.
sure. Well, I was teaching uh, theater at a college out here in Santa Clarita for about 10 years, and then we had, of course, the Great Recession, and then after that, COVID came pretty quickly on the heels of that. But during the recession, my teaching load got reduced pretty extensively. Of course, they didn't cut back on football, but they did cut back on the arts.
Right, right.
So, so I decided maybe this is a good time to go back to school, because at first I thought maybe I wanted to make the jump and work in TV,
Hmm.
or get a terminal degree so I could teach at a uni, right?
Hmm.
So I thought, all right, well, I'll go back to school. So I started going to CSULA has a program, a blended master's, MFA in television, film, and theater.
Hmm.
And after finishing the first year, at the end of the first year, we did all the theater and a little bit of television. And I just realized that that was not, it didn't interest me. That
Mm-mm.
that that primarily, or a lot of what a TV director did was decide where the cameras were going to be and when to switch this and when to switch that. And
And actually, they're kind of hired hands, really. They're not
yeah,
like auteurs or true
right.
storytellers in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Right, right. And so I was like, yeah, that I'm not interested in that. I really felt I was too old to make the leap into the film industry, and wasn't really sure I wanted to do film work. It's just a whole different process. I
Yeah.
like the immediacy of
Mm,
theater.
mhm.
I like working with the people. I like working towards the performance itself. It just, film and television, as you know, are completely different
Well, it's
processes.
a delayed gratification in the
Yeah,
creative process is how I put it. You
yeah,
know, when you're right there in the room and you complete that circuit, right, and the content has landed and transformed and moved people, you feel it. An artist, you know, you hang a piece in a gallery, you're really not there to feel the completion of the circuit. So I'm with you 100%. I love theater for that reason. When you're a filmmaker, yeah, you may or may not be there to see. Does that make sense?
yes,
Kind of
yeah.
to see that it's actually done its part.
And certainly film and television have a potential much greater and wider reach. But the
Mm-hmm.
process just was not for me. It just didn't align with what I wanted to do. And it
Right.
was funny because I was working on a film project at the end of the first year, and for- I I've injured myself 3 times in my life, and each of the times I injured myself, it changed my direction, which is
Fascinating.
Mhm.
so.
Right, the universe had to really speak
Mhm.
loud to get your
I
attention.
know that a friend of mine once said they had to cripple the cow to get her back to the barn. I'm like, excuse me. I'm like,
Did you
excuse
just call
me.
me a cow? Yeah, I think you just
I know.
called
I'm
me a
like,
cow.
excuse me. I'm like, I like the metaphor, but
Right.
so I broke my ankle, a silly thing, and so I couldn't finish going out filming the film project that I was doing for my film class. So I had to figure out what could I do from my desktop with the footage I already had, or stock footage, or that I could put together myself, or what could I do? What could I do? What could I do? And so I started thinking about, did Joseph Campbell ever do anything on the Grail Quest? Well, that's a stupid question, but I had never seen his work on the Grail Quest before.
Mhm.
So as I'm researching it, I find that, oh my gosh, Joseph Campbell's entire private library and all
Mm,
his notes and everything from his entire career are at this school 40 minutes from where I live, like
that's
in
amazing.
Carpinteria, right next to Santa Barbara. I'm like, what? What
Wow.
are you? What, what is this place? So I looked it up. It was Pacifica Graduate Institute. So I looked it up and I was like, what? Wait, I mean, what? I was like, there's a degree in mythological studies. Are you kidding me? I was like, mythological studies and depth psychology. I was like, I really felt like, and what I've said in the show notes before is about that sort of Hillmanian acorn theory, where you have a
Mhm, mhm,
daemon that nudges you to to complete what it is you came here to do in your life.
mhm.
And so I really feel that was a big course correction. And so I went and checked out the school on a free come check it out day, and I never looked back.
Love it.
It was probably the most transformative experience in my life, next to having children,
Wow, that's saying a lot, isn't it?
was going through that program.
Of
And it,
well, you know, I've known you. I watched you, right? I've known you.
yeah,
You and Renee both. I just admire you so much. This is a weird question, but have either of you ever read Asher Lev? The
no,
book is I Am Asher Lev.
no, I haven't read that one. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's by Chaim Potok. Anyway, it's just really inspiring because the mother. I'm gonna say too much here, but you know, my mom was a creative, and obviously, she's the definition of creativity and
Mhm.
just so nurturing of creativity. But you know, one thing she didn't have is that novelty chip we're talking about, right? Getting out and reinventing yourself, and in a good way, she was a homebody and very content. Although I took her to Europe, and I'm glad to say I was able to do that. But anyway, she just I think I was haunted by the mother character in again Chaim Potok's I Am Asher Lev because yeah, she went back to college after having empty nest syndrome and just kept reinventing herself. And I was like, I don't know that archetype of mother. It was really inspiring and kind of haunting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
Well,
get all my respect.
oh, you're so cute. Well, at some point, like that's the whole thing with at the time I went back to get my master's and PhD, I was going through the menopause midlife shift, which
Mm,
which we're not taught about. We're not taught
hmm
anything about it. We're not taught what, although menopause is having a hot moment right now, but we're not taught what to expect as we go into perimenopause. We're not taught that a human life has very real preordained psychological life stages that
Mhm.
hmm
if you are at all awake and aware and conscious that you will go through, and
hmm
that they're all very different and have very different opportunities and challenges within them. And so i was i was I was struggling through the underworld of these experiences while I was studying about them.
Wow.
So it
No
was,
wonder it was so transformative. It was
yeah,
just
it was,
in real
yeah,
time.
it was completely transformative, and
Wow.
then being able to focus on women's myths around the
Mhm.
world and the transformational emergence of a new life stage for women since 1900. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, just to say really briefly, what really blew my mind and what put me on this path more than anything
Mhm.
of my current career is in the year 1900, women in the US, statistically, women of color were dead by 43 and white women by 51.
Wow.
So in the past 100, years, women's lifespan have more than doubled for women of
hmm
color, or doubled, and increased by a third for non-women of color. That
Amazing.
means we've added an entire new life stage
hmm
to women's lives from say 50 to 80, 90, or beyond.
hmm
Boomer women and the women coming up after them are the first women in the history of humanity to live past menopause together as a cohort.
Right.
It has never happened before.
Wow.
Individual women, yeah, since the time of
hmm
Plato,
hmm
the great aunt, the old witch that lived at the edge of the medieval forest, that was the
The
healer,
crone,
the
right.
crone,
Yeah.
right, whatever. But entire generations of women living into this new life stage, which is why there's no maps, there's no models, there's no road
Right.
signs. It's
Well,
it's
we have some negative one, right? We have spinster, we have crone, we have a lot of negative ones. But I mean, tell me, I want to hear more about exactly how your practice emerged out of your studies, because I think it is a niche, right? A new niche
Yeah,
that needs to be filled, and you're doing it beautifully. But yeah, and I mean, obviously, I can't be expected to know the ins and outs of perimenopause and menopause because if they're
right.
not telling you, they're definitely not telling me, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I've had a lot of men say to me, "Well, what about men?" And I'm like, I invite you to go through the program and put together a men's
Right.
program.
Well,
I
no,
can't,
there's the midlife crisis where you go get a trophy wife and
yeah,
a sports car, right? That's the
right,
equivalent. But
right,
anyway, I think, and men have empty nest syndrome as well. But what I want to say, because I'm always going to draw parallels, I'm not, as Virginia knows, I don't do the war between the sexes. I have no
yeah,
horse in that race. But what I will say is, I think we need to return cultural value to wisdom across the board, right? You don't take old folks out to the field and shoot them. We're so youth oriented. I just think we need across the board to return cultural value to the wisdom that only comes with experience, if that makes sense.
yeah,
And a lot of cultures do, like we said, indigenous cultures do actually value their elders.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a part of the whole thing. I mean, taking what I learned and how I incorporated myth into it, to
hmm
answer your question,
Yeah.
um, is that most mythologies, well, let me start by saying all religions are mythologies, but not all myths are religions.
Oh, slow down. Hold on.
Mythologies,
I
right?
love that. Wow.
Mythologies meaning religions being mythologies, meaning that they serve the function to relate us as cultures back to the divine, right?
Mhm.
Right. Right.
However they do that.
hmm
So mythologies in some ways developed out of the need for the human psyche to understand or find the solution to a problem that they were living
hmm
or experiencing.
hmm
Mhm.
So, as I was doing my research and as I was studying women's mythologies, I realized that there are myths that you can use to show and help women understand how to move through any particular problem they're experiencing.
Mm,
That myths show us that the human struggles that we're having
mhm.
are very personal experiences of universal rites of passage.
I love that. Yep.
And so, without sounding too trite, there's almost a myth that's an answer, a myth, a folk tale, or a fairy tale that's
Mhm.
an answer to any human problem.
Yep. Well, I have said, there's a lot of lip service given to, oh, story is something relatable about the human condition. I go further and I say it's actually the handbook for how to navigate life as an expression of consciousness in the physical realm. And of course, I lose people with that. So, but people don't really think about what does that mean, the human condition. I say story is the handbook for how to navigate life, right? It teaches us how to live in the world.
Absolutely. That's it in a nutshell. You've got it. We're done. No.
No, no, but I love what you said that because we've talked about this a little bit, how
Mhm.
of course there are universal implications, but I love dissecting myth for how it resonates with my own subjective personal experience, right? And then
Yes.
how they kind of operate in relation to one another, not in isolation. I won't go on and on, but
No,
Icarus, like you
absolutely.
got to consider what came before.
Yeah. And if it doesn't relate to you, how are you going to how are you going to experience it, unpack it? How are you going to be able to use it? If you can't understand it, if you can't get behind the metaphor, if you can't
Right.
activate it,
Mhm.
then it's going to just be a dead bunch of words on a piece of paper.
Well, that's what I see too. I mean, we're all different. You have
Mhm.
empirical people and you have more rational people. I'm using those words, right? Rationalism and empiricism. So you have spiritual people and then you have the dumbasses. No, I'm kidding. People are always, I think one contingent is going to be more likely to say, oh, that explains the seasons. And I'm going to say, nah, it actually explains the cycles that we go through, right, in our spiritual journey. So I think people dismiss myth often as explaining nature.
Mhm.
Sure, as a metaphor for explaining the human condition is how I put it.
Well,
The
it's like
Persephone ones are, we talked about Persephone and
yeah, it's the
it's
ultimate onion. Yeah,
hmm,
if you want to look at the outer layer, yeah, it's talking about, yeah, Persephone returning is the seasons. Yeah. But it's much more than that. Let's go a layer below. Let's go a layer below. Let's go back with her to the underworld. Let's go, talk about, eating the seed of the pomegranate as the
mm,
metaphor for social sexual awakening. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about, I mean, there's so much in there.
yep.
But yeah, you can, as Joseph Campbell said, don't mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
love
love that you
that.
had that right at your literally your fingertips. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I have a question, Andrea, because I'm studying narrative therapy because that's kind of where my focus is, especially
Mhm.
because of coming from the creative side of things, for my counseling practice. And a lot of what you're talking about when it comes to the mythology, perspective of it pretty much aligns the same thing. It's that whole shifting of, and reframing the personal narrative. I mean, which is a lot of what, Dominic talks about too in this podcast. So I'm just wondering because, as you guys were just kind of just talking a second ago, do you think that because of how everything's just so instantaneous now in culture,
Mm,
especially here in Western civilization, that we are missing the, analogies and those little tiny, things that relate, like you're saying, like with Persephone, like, you know, people go, oh, it's changing the seasons. Well, yeah, but like you said, start peeling back those layers. Do you think because of that instant gratification, that instant
mm.
everything, that we're not, at least the younger generations just aren't understanding that anymore?
I wouldn't even limit it to the younger generation, to be honest with you.
All us older ones are also
Well,
getting that
I
way
was gonna say
too.
we throw in the towels, right? We
Yeah,
old dinosaurs go, well,
yeah,
all right, I'm obsolete. I'm gonna throw in the towel and be just like
true.
everybody else. I have something to say about that, Andrea. Do you have anything more to say about maybe their incapacity for I don't know, processing
I don't think
more
there's
is
an
what I heard.
incapacity. I think what happens is they're not exposed to it.
Mm,
It's not a part of our education. There's very few, only very high end places that deal with classical and philosophical education now for young
mm,
people. And
mhm,
so they're not exposed to it. And
right.
so it's like a Pandora. It's like once they're given the box and they open it, it's a revelation.
Mhm.
Mm. Well, that's what I meant by they're starved for it. I mean, and I guess what I'm so sorry, but now I'm having a little epiphany here. Um, I would say because I'm very aware that, as Greg Spolenka said, we used to be told, as the boys more so than the girls, like, go out, don't come home till sundown. Right. You had summer vacation. And he
Mhm.
said we ran around like banshees. And I said, we developed pads on our feet from not wearing shoes. And that is where we learned our imagination and our creativity.
Mhm.
And sometimes when you have all the answers for you on your little device and you don't have to make discoveries and therefore nurture your imagination and your creativity, maybe that's where the conceptual skills lie. So I do know that nuance is lost on younger generations, right? And part of it is this, I don't know, the divisive impulse to like make everything binary and imagine, right? Some kind of
Mhm.
uh, conflict where there may not be one. And so nuance is a thing of the past, in my understanding. So I think maybe sometimes conceptual skills go with that, and that includes metaphor. I'll just leave it at that. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think um looking at the younger generation along with the conceptual skills and the nuance, the even if we're talking traditional Western religious practice over the past 400 years, whatever we're talking about here, like
Mhm,
um there there are some young people who are gravitating towards a more nature-based spirituality,
mhm,
and there are some who are not. And for those who are not open to that, the the liminal experience of having um, an epiphanal moment
mhm,
from being in nature,
mhm.
Mhm.
from seeing
The peak
something,
peak experience. Yeah.
a peak experience, and connecting that to being something that is divine, something
Mm.
that was special,
They're
something
missing
that
out on numinous and profound moments. You don't get,
a-
right, numinous
and
and
thinking
profound
or
moments on
understanding.
TikTok.
Yes. Or thinking and understanding that that numinous moment was exactly prepared for you, that that
Wow.
was meant for you, that that was created by the
The
super
Chinese
consciousness, the divine, to as an experience for you because you are going through dot dot dot,
Mm, mm.
I love that.
right?
What actually, if you don't mind, if I could use that as a transition, I do want to hear more about the acorn theory. You know, uh,
Sure.
yeah, because it was new to me a little bit, and especially Damon. That seems like a negative word to me. Can you talk a little bit about the acorn theory?
Sure. The uh James Hillman it was one of the leaders in depth psychology.
Hmm.
Um, and he taught at Pacifica, although he had passed away quite a while before I actually got there.
Hmm.
Um, and his book is the book on the Acorn Theory is called The Soul's Code, Soul apostrophe
We could
S.
put that in the notes, by the way, the show
Yeah,
notes,
Mhm.
if there's anything you want to share.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Soul's Code. And
Hmm.
um, he starts talking about the Acorn Theory. I'm just going to read a little bit of what he said so I don't misquote him. He says, quote, each person enters the world called. More deeply, however, we are victims of academic, scientific, and even therapeutic psychology, whose paradigms do not sufficiently account for or engage with, and therefore ignore, the sense of calling,
Mm,
that essential mystery at the heart of each human life. you're born with a character. It's a given, a gift, as the old stories say, from the guardian upon your birth. Each the soul of each of us is given a unique daemon. And
Mhm.
now demon, daemon is a concept and a word that comes from the ancient Greece. And
Mhm.
Mhm.
demon was the idea of the daemon was mutilated and turned into the demon. Okay.
Okay, that explains it.
So
Okay.
each of us is given a unique daemon before we're born, and it has selected an image or pattern that we live on earth. This soul companion, the daemon, guides us here. In the process of arrival, however, and this of course goes to Plato, but we forget all that took place, the myth of took all that took place and believe we come in empty. The daemon remembers what is your image and what belongs to your pattern, and therefore is the carrier of your destiny. Right. So he's he's writing about what I've experienced like since childhood in ever increasing frequency in my own
Mhm.
life. Fate, character, innate image, right?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
we each have that uniqueness.
Mhm.
And so he says that what happens is that throughout your life, that daemon, you almost think of it like that little um supporter on your shoulder, like
Mhm.
keeps nudging you to fulfilling your calling.
Mhm.
And one of the great, and I'm just going to paraphrase here because I don't have the quote in front of me. One of the great things that he says is that as you get older and later in life, you can look back at your personal myth and you can look and see in the stream, in the river of your life, where your daemon has nudged you to take
Mhm.
different tributaries
Yep.
Yeah.
in order to fulfill your calling.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. Again, doing this podcast, we're what 40 something
Mhm.
episodes in, and a lot of themes recur. And my contention is when it comes to any philosophic tradition or spiritual principle, there are a myriad ways of saying the same thing, right? And so you actually find with the major religions, actually, they're kind of saying the same thing using different terminology. And then in more recent traditions like the New Age, which lumps everything into one category, right? Or even manifestation circles, law of attraction circles, there is
Mhm.
proprietary language as well. So, but that one, just the imagery of it really resonates with me. And we have been lucky enough to have kindred spirits on this podcast, but also people that have had a major nudge, by the way. You may remember in the Nancy Bergeron episode, we said the universe speaks louder and louder to get your attention.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
I was so happy to hear her on that episode. It was so wonderful to
she's
hear.
amazing. And by the way, she's very much in line with what we were talking about, relevancy and engagement later in life.
Mhm.
I joke like Jane Fonda is the reason I get up in the morning.
Yeah,
Like, I rely on you, and Nancy is also in that category. She's
yeah,
the
absolutely.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I was just kind of hinting that we have seen a lot of people that would say, absolutely. It's not just that in retrospect you connect dots because that's a human compulsion. It's the reality, right? And sometimes, if time is a construct of man and there is no linear time, it does seem like fate or destiny. I would argue that we have free will to co create with divinity, co create with the gods.
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah, but of course it's a journey, and that is the hero's journey, right?
Yeah.
And of
Mhm.
course, if you ignore that daemon too long, you will get probably a bigger and bigger nudge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly,
Absolutely.
honestly, or I think that's where we see people who tend to have that battle. And I know Dominic, you'll probably relate to this quite well since you recently went through this. But like my mom currently is on hospice, and I know she keeps talking about what was her purpose in life, and that's a conversation her and I have a lot. So as you were kind of sharing that, I was thinking about like you know kind of walking that road with my mom right now, going through what was her calling and
Mm,
having her go back through those memories and the things that she's done and what her purpose was. I think sometimes when people fight it,
mm,
they go into those really deep mental depressive kind of areas where you see the addictions or the depression, the anxiety. Some of that comes from that because they're not
mm,
trying to connect, I think,
mhm.
universally with who they are and what they are called to do here.
Yeah,
I agree. Yep.
yeah, I think that's true. I think it's that universal life reassessment that happens in midlife and beyond,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then looking at legacy and thinking
I was
about.
going to say legacy because I think ego wants to, right? Especially if you're nearing
Mhm.
the brink of death,
Mhm.
ego wants to make sure you've left a legacy. But sometimes it's not what you think, right?
Right.
If you always wanted to be an artist, but you feel like you never got that luxury, you know what? Your legacy is probably your four children or everybody you touched that you don't even realize you made a difference with them. I'm talking about my mom, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Your legacy may not be what you think, but maybe that's why we need to surrender, right, to a higher will or the will of the divine and say, use me as you wish for the dialectic, for the evolution of, right, of the
Mhm.
species.
Yes, absolutely. And I this is going to sound really. Here we go. I'm going to say something that might sound trite, but that's okay. I'm going to say it anyway.
Hallmark has a job waiting for you. Don't worry.
Yes, exactly. I really think in the end, in the end of all things, legacy, life, work, the only thing that matters is love.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Isn't that
And
amazing?
Mhm.
and all of its permutations.
Yep. Well, exact. That's kind of what I meant by like there's different proprietary language, but at the bottom of it all, isn't it always, even within a given moment, the shift from fear to love and actually tapping into your compassion? That's every nudge is toward that end, isn't it?
Ideally, I think, and but it's so funny because people, their situations, how they grow up, their families, their cultures, where they are in the world, their opportunities, um, the trials, the challenges, traumas that people experience,
Hmm.
all um, all color and change the perspective, right,
Hmm. Yep.
of the person
And it's
who's
so
experiencing.
simple at the bottom of it all, right? We're just being, actually, I think we're being called upon to relinquish mind and ego and tap into our core essence, which is always love. It's always love.
Yeah, I think
That's
so. It's sometimes it's a complicated stripping away to get there.
right.
Yeah, and that has a lot to do with ego,
Well,
certainly.
but I think maybe that's what Virginia was hinting at when we have existential crises or depression or chronic anxiety. It's because we are not on our path. And those are the nudges that become the dark nights of the soul that give us no choice. So,
Yep.
but I do feel like, Andre, I do want to steer this a little bit because it's directly related, I think, to the midlife crises that you are counseling women through. Does that sound right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at women have a unique, and I'm not saying that men don't have a hard time, but I focus, my practice focuses on women,
Mhm.
not because I don't like men. But that's
Let's put
that's
that clear here. Make
yes,
that
let's
clear.
make that really clear. I have a husband of 34 years. I'm a mother of, I mean, I'm a mother and the daughter of a man, and
All right.
that, whatever. And I have
And you're
two
putting up with
brothers.
them beautifully. I'm kidding. Go.
Yeah, two brothers and a son. I love men.
Okay.
Um, but women go through a unique thing at midlife because we go through a triple transformation. One is physical,
Mhm,
which is the obviously the perimenopause to postmenopause.
mhm,
The other part of the transformation is the psychological, which is the midlife reassessment. Men go
Mhm.
through that as well. And then because women's embodied experience of life is so tied to their bodies, their cycles,
mm, mhm,
their hormones, their life experience, right?
mhm,
Those two together, they can't be separated. They're like the warp and the woof of a tapestry. So when
mhm,
you pull on one, you snag the other. And because the transformation in those two is so profound, it generally creates a third transformation, which I consider to be spiritual.
mm, mhm.
And
So
I agree
women
with
are
that.
going through this triple transformation, right?
Mhm.
And
I'm
it,
glad you addressed that. That was one of my questions, by the way. What is the triple transformation? Because I
yeah,
knew it didn't correlate with perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. I thank you for
yeah,
explaining that.
yeah. It's so it ends up being a time of life where we're dealing with women deal with seven realms of change. I've identified 7 realms of change I use in my coaching, right?
Can you
Yes, absolutely.
squander those, or do we have
Yes,
to?
I'll share them for sure.
I'm like, I want to hear them.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's the 7 realms of change are your changing body,
Mhm,
your changing self-image, your changing needs,
mhm,
your changing feelings,
mhm,
you're changing roles,
mhm.
you're changing priorities, and you're changing goals.
I just hit all of those.
Okay.
All 7 right now in
Wow,
my life.
Okay.
wow.
And they're like they're like intersecting circles, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like a Venn
A
diagram.
Venn diagram, right?
Yep. And so
And there's Virginia at the center of all
yeah,
of them.
there
I
you go. And
I
the
feel like
thing
this is
is
about me.
it is about you. Of course it is. That these are 7 realms that women have to navigate. We have to navigate and sail through these realms. And this year, one of those realms may be really easy and fair sailing for you, but in 3 years, you're changing roles may be the realm that gives you the hardest time, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And this year it may be the realm of the body. And so it's like it's a hologram that's continually moving,
Mhm.
and which realm you're in, or realms plural, you're in and dealing with at any one time, shift and change as you age.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
the transformation that women go through, the triple transformation, is in all of these realms.
Well,
And
if I could play host, one of the questions I had was, well, it's a two-parter. One, what do you most often see in your practice of counseling? What are most women up against? And
Mhm.
then secondly, oh, did you have any surprises? Like, what did you not expect women to be struggling with at that age?
Oh, that's interesting. Um,
Just start with the
what
first
I
one.
most often see,
What's yeah, most
yeah,
often see.
what I most often see women struggling with is trying to reclaim their identity
Mm,
after spending 20 to 30 years tending everybody else's garden,
yes.
Yep.
their family, their spouse, their aging parents, their colleagues, their children, their friends,
Hmm.
their community, their church, whatever they're involved in.
Being
And
all things to
those
all people all the time and doing it with a smile, right?
yes, yes. And so those householder years from say 18 to
Mm-hmm.
20, when we're first setting out and creating our own life, to 45, right,
Mm-hmm.
are so busy. And women's hormonal profile, right, and hormonal cycles in that time of life, right, instinctively, right,
Mm-hmm.
encourage them to care for,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not every woman is the same. We can't say this about every woman, but
Mm-hmm.
in terms of physiological stages.
Right.
And so we spend so much time doing all that. When we get to the phase where estrogen starts to walk out the door, our psychology changes. Even if women decide to do hormone therapy treatment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
The psychological shift happens just the same, right?
Yeah.
It's going to happen anyway. And so women are like saying, okay, who am I now? What
Mm-hmm.
do I want to do now? I have another 20 to 30 years ahead of me that my mother, my grandmother, whoever never had. Who
Mm-hmm.
do I want to become? What do I want to do? And so women, that's what I encounter most often, as women saying, what now?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm gonna say I've ran into that quite a bit myself, and it seems like when and the most common thing that I hear too from a lot of the women is typically, and I mean, and I've experienced this myself because I'm right there because I'm turning 49 this year, um, is your identity has been this external identity based off the things you're doing and you know like being the wife to your spouse and being the mother to your children, and so that's kind of what's always identified who you are, even though internally there's more to you that kind of gets suppressed. And I've heard so many women say that, and I know from my own my own life, especially in this past year, my husband kind of looks at me because I'll like make weird comments every so often. And he's like, where did that come from? I've been with you for over 20 years. Like, you've never, acknowledged that to me before. And I'm like, yeah, I did back when we were first dating. You just don't remember. And so I finally told him, I said, look, I said, this bird's out of its cage. I'm spreading my wings. You can soar
Right.
next to me, or I don't know what to tell you.
Right. Well, but you've also hinted that, and we agreed, everybody wants to hold you in an old role. Your
Mm-hmm.
kids want their mom, the mom they know.
Right.
And so it happens across the board relationally, where if you've
Mm-hmm.
learned and grown spiritually or emotionally, and it's suddenly you're no longer serving people, right, in their own according to their needs, they don't want to allow you to grow necessarily. But I think
Right.
that's across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a very unique second individuation,
Yep.
so that women have the opportunity to grow into their most authentic and fulfilled
Mm,
selves while living in the challenging time of change, of aging, of limitations that happen for many women, most women as they age, for
beautiful.
societal and cultural
Mhm,
pressures, glass ceilings, career issues, those kinds of things. But that's, I would say,
mhm.
most often it's women trying to reclaim who they are and what they
Right.
want to do now.
Yeah, well, that leads to a question, actually. I've been biting my tongue a little bit. It sounds like on a personal level, and I think empty nest syndrome is just part of that, right? If you're socialized to, again, put your needs last and be that mother or that caretaker or that dutiful wife, right? And you're
Mhm.
you're silenced and erased actually for the majority of your life. Of course, you're going to now assert whatever that essence was, right? We have a lot of guests that say it was like coming home. I rediscovered my essence. And that includes your authentic gifts that I
Yeah,
would say you are being called upon to contribute to the collective. But if you want to take it from the micro to the macro, I'm wondering, Andrea, if it's going to be different for every woman. You are meant to be a writer or share your stories, whatever your authentic gifts are what you're going to reclaim at this Regency stage, I'm guessing. Is there, in your
ideally.
opinion, so- right,
Ideally,
ideally,
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
but is there a macro level? Have you noticed, again, in your practice or in your studies, do you feel there's a role that women are supposed to be playing? Hate that word. Supposed to be playing in culture. Like, what is the Regency stage on a macro level? Is
Oh,
there
you have just opened a big, big gate.
I was thinking that.
wisdom?
You swung open a big gate. Yes. I think on a macro level,
Mhm,
looking at human history and looking at mythological history and I guess I would say archetypal soul, right? Psychology, right?
mhm,
This
mhm,
psyche is soul, ology is study of.
mhm.
Um, I don't believe that this new life stage has emerged as a coincidence.
No, of
I
course
believe
not.
that for thousands of years we've lived in a patriarchal construct
Mhm.
that's been what it's been. I'll just say briefly that patriarchy is a social construct that is damaging to everyone.
Of course.
Um, and so, starting like in 1900 with at the change of the century, with say women's suffrage, moving up into like the 1960s and 70s, and we have social change, we have feminism, we have spiritual feminism, the rise of the goddess movement, we have all these different waves of feminism. I think we're in the fifth or sixth wave now, I'm not exactly sure which.
Mm,
Um, and so what has happened is, I believe that the archetypal feminine, which is not feminine like gender, but the archetypal energies that Jung and depth psychologists and archetypal psychologists would say are compassion, creativity,
mhm,
empathy, receptivity, collaboration, communication, and so on. There's a whole long list. That these qualities of the archetypal feminine are on the rise at a time when we need to find a balance, like the yin and yang,
mhm,
between the archetypal and masculine and archetypal feminine, right?
mhm.
If humans are going to survive as a species on this planet.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
And so the
I
rise of the
sorry, in the
divine.
interest of time, I'm gonna play host. I'm
Okay.
so glad you went into that because it's the perfect transition to something we both agreed we should get to. But I agree with that. And I would add, like, I mean, it's not news to any of us that patriarchy has run its course, right? When it leads to exploitation and marginalization, when it leads to colonization, when it leads to capitalist greed, which means ravaging of resources, and we're going to have to find a new rock to live on. Obviously, we're ushering it out and it's obsolete, right? So
Right.
when I said merging of binaries, I actually see it happening in a myriad of areas. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, typically or archetypally feminine and masculine traits have nothing to do with gender. Thank you for saying that, right?
Yeah.
Masculine and feminine is just a word, and we have all of it in all of us. But maybe we all need to work on ourselves a little bit so that we embrace both sides and we buck socialization a little bit. I do think that's the path we're on. So the perfect transition here is the warrior goddess. So a moment ago, I was going to say, every archetype we talk about, I'm like, let's talk about some examples, but there's just not time for all of it. So I do want to have you back on if you're willing, and we're going to get a little more into specific archetypes. But
Sure.
if you would be willing to read the article that you did for Medium,
Sure.
a
Absolutely.
great way of talking about these, at least those three archetypes, and how they're actually really, you mentioned again, you hint, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've hinted at myth as being a great tool for your own personal growth. And that I think maybe some of your, um, what do you call them? The people you're coaching.
Clients. There you
Clients thing. I was looking for that word.
go.
Some of your clients probably have really had their eyes open to the power of myth to aid in one's personal journey. So I think maybe if we talk about the wise old man and the tyrant and the return of the warrior, I said princess, didn't I? The warrior queen. Maybe that'll be it'll click for our listeners, just exactly how universal these archetypes are.
Sure. Sure. I'll start at the top, and if it runs too long, you can cut me off. How's it start? How's it
We
sound?
have a trap door. You don't know it. We had it installed in your YouTube version.
All right, so this is currently on my new Medium page where I'm going to be writing some more as soon as I'm done taking care of my husband who just had a knee replacement surgery. Um, but the title of the little post is called "Vice President Kamala Devi Harris Respecting the Power of Myth in the Moment: The Rise of the Archetypal Warrior Queen." Bill Moyer's interview with Joseph Campbell for the PBS program The Power of Myth rekindled my childhood interest in mythology, anthropology, and archaeology. Campbell offered an eye-opening perspective that invited people worldwide to see their lives and cultures through a different lens. Mythology can give you a multi-level perspective on the events of the day. A mythological perspective invites you to look at daily life and global events from the top down, opening your mind to see the overstory, the great tale, instead of being battered, blinded, and buried by billions of daily data points.
Hmm.
The ending of President Joe Biden's candidacy and his endorsement of Kamala Harris catapulted my political perspective from the mundane into the mythic realm. I see the power of myth expressing itself in this political and cultural moment. Focusing on the presidential race from a mythological and archetypal perspective, we've been caught in a dizzying whirlpool of conscious and unconscious powers and influences since 2015. As of today, we've been unable to escape from it. This year began with the archetypes of the tyrant king challenging the wise old man. And now the wise old man is bequeathing his place to the warrior queen, a dynamic representation of the rising return of the archetypal feminine. Now, make no mistake, I'm not talking about abstract intellectual principles that have no application in our daily lives. The archetype of tyrant king has revealed itself globally through the rise of far-right fascist political ideologies, wars, terrorism, fear-mongering, heightened racism, white supremacy, religious persecution, attacks on the rights of women and the LGBTQIA community, the denial of truth, science, climate change, and the promotion of alternative facts and lies.
Just that.
Yeah.
Just
The,
that.
The rise of the warrior queen archetype is a direct response from the collective unconscious, the psyche of
Mm.
humanity, and the anima mundi, the world soul. At this time of existential crisis, life itself is calling for a fundamental rebalancing of powers and priorities. Vice President Harris, as a metaphoric warrior queen, is eminently powerful because she embodies the necessary qualities of leadership from both the archetypal feminine and the archetypal masculine. It's important to note that with these terms, I'm not referring to female and male genders as we've traditionally known them, but to deeper psychological and archetypal principles that are active in all humanity. The archetypal feminine qualities include skilled communication, collaboration, active intuition, sharp, well honed instincts, creativity, the ability to be reflective, responsive, compassionate, and empathetic. Additional aspects of the archetypal feminine are nurturance, loving, caretaking, protecting, and being in tune with the cycles of nature and one's body. The warrior queen also embodies traditional male archetypal energies, including leadership, logic, reason, restraint, rationality, order, structure, rhetoric, and justice. I invite you to consider how Vice President Harris embodies all of these archetypal energies. I see her mythologically representing the rise of the warrior queen and the return of the archetypal feminine. This is a call for the return of power to half of humanity in a world that's been exploited to the brink of an existential crisis by thousands of years of patriarchy. It's a failed cultural system that oppresses all peoples and denies women their divinity and equality. Patriarchy represses, denies, and vilifies the mythological power of the archetypal feminine in all humanity. Through her family life and career, Vice President Harris has been educated in and influenced by multiple mythological and religious traditions. This, combined with her education and career experience, give her the knowledge and unique skill set to meet this mythological and political moment. All of these factors combine to reveal the dawning of a new generation of feminine leadership, and just in time. In her personal life, Kamala
Sorry.
Devi Harris is a mixed race woman. She was born to a South Asian mother and a father of Afro-Jamaican descent. She identifies as a Black woman, and she is married and has two stepsisters, two stepdaughters, excuse me,
Daughters, right?
stepdaughters, right? Spiritual background. She was raised in the Hindu tradition and the Black Baptist Church. Her husband is Jewish. Her stepdaughters call her Mamala, which is very close to the Yiddish term used as an endearment by children for their mother, Mamaleh. VP Harris knows the beauty and power within these three mythological religious traditions. Well, what's in a name? Kamala Harris means lotus in Sanskrit, the ancient language of the Hindu tradition, and Devi translates as goddess, divine, heavenly, or anything of excellence. The Times of India writes, quote, Kamala Devi Harris has been blessed with a name that's packed with infinity and energy that is both Kamala and Devi, close quote. The lotus in this case is called the Saharasra and is located on the crown chakra. This 1,000 petal lotus, when opened, represents unbounded consciousness. Devi is one Hindu term for the Mahadevi, or great goddess energy behind the creation of the universe. And the Devi incarnates as many goddesses, including warrior goddesses. The Tanakh has its share of celebrated warrior women. In the New Testament, Jesus was born of a woman, first revealed himself to a woman, was attended by women on the cross, and ultimately it was a woman who witnessed his resurrection and the birth of Christianity. Vice President Harris has a multi-mythic spiritual foundation that invokes the power of the feminine and inclusion within diversity. In her career exemplifies her embodiment of archetypal masculine energies necessary for the warrior queen. She's highly educated. A lawyer, she's worked as the district attorney of San Francisco, a U.S. senator, the attorney general of the state of California. She's the first woman and the first Black biracial person to serve as vice president of the United States. Vice President Harris is a shining example of Apollonian masculine archetypal energy. She embodies logic, law, rules, leadership, reason, rationality, order, and the principles of justice in her life and work. These are applied through her support for women's reproductive freedom, women's rights, children's rights, gun safety, children's health, safety and welfare advocacy, affordable childcare, affordable health care, a living wage, criminal justice reform, and a determination to rebuild the middle class. In her skills, we see the warrior, and how she applies them, we see the queen. Kamala Devi Harris knows and embraces three of the major world mythologies and religions. The power of her experience in law and politics and her care and compassion for others are tailor made to meet the moment. Mythologically, Vice President Harris embodies a coalescence of archetypal energies, representing some of the finest qualities of the archetypal masculine and feminine in leadership. In her, symbolically, I see the power of the Devi, the ancient sacred feminine, reclaiming its rightful place in culture, allowing the US the opportunity to realign, readjust, and reset our priorities as a nation and a world leader. We're standing at the threshold of change. We can feel the depth and breadth of this moment every day as the energies of our collective unconscious boil over into aggressive attacks on our democracy, from an attempted coup to an attempted assassination. This is a highly charged political, cultural, and psychological energy field to live in and lead from, full of positive potential and simultaneously fraught with danger from within our collective shadow. The warrior queen archetype is invoked for just such a moment. What will happen next week or over the next 70 days, 80, 90
Right,
days,
right.
right? Time will tell, but we are truly living in a mythic moment.
Wow. Nailed it. You nailed it. That's really inspiring to hear it laid out like that. And you nailed it, man. You're an expert in your field. Yeah, I can't really add to that, but thank you for sharing it. I mean, I guess it might be worth saying because, yeah, we should come to a close soon. But I mentioned earlier that, different belief systems or I don't know, different lenses through which you can view this process, right? The individual evolution of the spirit and then the macro, the cultural evolution.
Mhm.
To me, I get in trouble for talking about um, Hegel's dialectic, but I think you mentioned it's no mistake that she emerged, right? And
Yeah.
I do feel like you can look at it through a spiritual lens, if you like, a philosophical lens, or a very empirical Newtonian lens. And I would say epigenetics is teaching us more and more that, there is a component of non local energetic communication and that we are all, right, entangled and
Hmm.
consciousness is out to propagate. The human race is out to propagate. So yes, nothing, if you buy into Hegel's dialectic a little bit, yeah, history chews people up and spits them out and uses them. And sometimes, oops, it's a Hitler, right? But it's actually needed in the dialectic in our evolution. So I would just agree 100%. It's no mistake that she emerged as the warrior queen at this moment because, yeah, it's pretty clear patriarchy has run its course. Are we preaching? Am I preaching now?
No, I don't think
No.
so. I think it's the thing that's so fascinating to me about myth and about story is that when we look at what's going on in the world from a mythological perspective, like that article that I just shared,
Thank you.
um,
Mhm.
it allows us like to look at the great tale from the top down.
I loved overstory. I actually didn't know that word, and
Yeah.
it refers to the bough, right? The canopy of the trees.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it because it's metaphor, right? Right. It's not. It's a figurative use of the word, really.
Yeah. And so the whole idea and everything that I do in my work and my whole love of mythology as a life practice is that it allows you to see your life and what's going on in the world from the top down instead of being under it all the time,
Right.
right? Where
Right.
we can feel like we're under it, like we're under
Hmm.
a hot, wet blanket or we're
Well, right. I like the term meta self. Like on an individual level, we can't always have objectivity about ourselves or lucidity or
under.
clarity, but some people do nurture a meta self a little more than others. But
Mhm.
societally, I would say like in the 90s, you had all those talk shows where we took everything that had been swept under the carpet and put it under a microscope. So we're on the right path, I think, right? Where we're willing to talk about these things. Virginia, before I sort of bring it to a close, what did you think of that article? Number one, amazing, right?
Yeah, I love how you tied it all together and gave it a different perspective that was outside of the propaganda side of things.
Yeah, I don't think that was a political piece
No,
at all. It's a
no,
human piece, isn't it?
exactly. That's what I liked about it.
Yeah. Any questions for her? Or should we kind of slowly bring this to a close with the caveat that we would love to have you back, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't have any questions. I think that was just such a great ending point right
I
there.
do too. Yeah, let's not spoil a good thing. Andre, is there any final word of wisdom you would like to share with listeners before we wrap it up?
I think we've covered it all. All I can say is, looking at and reading your book, Language of the Soul, conversations like this are food for the soul.
Oh my God. I
Yeah,
agree. It
really.
keeps me motivated. I'll tell you
Mhm.
that. It's really easy to give up on humanity, the planet, throw in the towel. And this podcast helps me renew my hope, I guess. Right. And thank
Yeah.
God for kindred spirits like you. You were the ideal guest, by the way. Not that you're a thing of the past, but you have been the ideal guest.
Well,
You're
thank
not
you.
going to
It's been
language.
my pleasure to be here with both you and Virginia. It's been awesome.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you so much. All right, then, Virginia, final words of wisdom.
Um, Basically, to just always look for beyond just what's in front of you to see what is being trying to be said to you in the universe, and then of course to always play it forward. Don't wallow in
Love
the
it.
details.
Love it. Yeah, let's look beyond the end of our nose.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And to our listeners, thank you so much. And remember, life is story. Individually and collectively, we can get our hands in the clay. We can tell a new story. See you next time.